Hello and welcome to Heroes and Humans of Football. My name is Mehreen Khan.
And I'm Simon Cooper. This is the football show where we take the hero and we show you the human.
From Johan Cruyff to Megan Rapinoe.
And from George Best to Kylian Mbappe.
This is the Human Football Podcast. Last week we had a special episode on the story of the Afghan women's national team, the only non-team in international football. If you haven't already, be sure to check it out.
Today's episode is the story of one of the most exciting teams ever, I would argue the most exciting team ever, Holland, the Netherlands, at the 1974 World Cup, led by the most interesting, infuriating, and the most influential figure in modern football history. That is right, he is my childhood hero, Johan Cruyff, even though I fell out with him many years later, an episode that we're going to revisit today in therapeutically safe conditions.
I actually can't wait for this story. But can you just go back over the pronunciation? Because say it slowly for idiots like me. Because I'm going to mispronounce it.
I would never use that word about you. I would speak of people who have different abilities. Johan Cruyff.
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 I'm going to call him Cruyff.
Well, if you call him Cruyff, then people who don't know will know who we're talking about. Yeah.
Most of the listeners. So I obviously don't know anything about Johan Cruyff really, because this is ancient history to me. However, like most football fans, I keep hearing over and over again that the 1974 Dutch team was the greatest team to have never won the World Cup. And to be honest, I imagine like most football fans, I've never actually interrogated whether this is true or not.
It is true, by the way, but carry on.
Well, we're going to find out why. I think you're reasonably unreliable narrator for this, but you're the only narrator that we have, so we're going to have to go with it.
Okay, well, listen here. Holland in 74 were fated to win the World Cup, but they were ruined just before the final by the notorious swimming pool affair. And that's named after a story in the German tabloid Bild, which ran under the headline a couple of days before the final, Cruyff, Champagne and Naked Girls. And in the final, Cruyff didn't have a great game. Holland lost 2-1 to West Germany, a match that obviously also, and we'll come to this, had resonances with the war of just 30 years before. But to Dutch fans like me, okay, I'm not really Dutch, but I am a Dutch fan and I grew up there, and to Cruyff, Holland really won that World Cup. Why? Because we played the fast, hyper-pressing, attacking football with players changing positions all the time that is now normal top football. It's the football we see every week, the football of Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Manchester City. And crucially, City are led, and this whole movement in football is led by Johan Cruyff's disciple, his footballing son, Pep Guardiola.
And you can listen to our episode on Pep Guardiola where he speaks a lot about how Johan Cruyff taught him everything he knew about football.
Pep once said, I knew nothing about football until I met Cruyff.
So I feel like this episode is the origin story of what people consider to be now just football. Normal
It's
football.
Exactly right. Yeah, the football you see every day, this is where it comes from
Over
Holland
half a
74.
century ago.
Yes, it was developed in the late 60s on a cold, small ground in Amsterdam East by these two slightly lunatic individuals, Cruyff and Rinus Michels.
Okay, I'm invested.
And those 25 days of the World Cup 74 was when Holland showed this new invention to the world. They're already playing it, but those 25 days is when the world sees it. And all my life, my own life, has been a preparation for this podcast.
Come on.
It makes sense in hindsight. We are doing this for the 50th anniversary of the greatest team on earth. Apologies to listeners. Like with the recent Messi podcast, you're going to hear a lot more from me than usual. Because Cruyff is the biggest footballing figure in my life, you will hear less from Mehreen, which I'm sure is a source of regret.
Like the biggest figure in your life?
That's strong.
Is that strong? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Joseph Heller, Randy Newman, but yeah.
Randy Newman, the guy from Toy Story soundtrack.
Among other things, yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
You love him? No way.
Yeah,
you've got a friend in me. That's actually a banging song.
You only know him from Toy Story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, at least I know him.
Let's leave that there. We will come to how Cruyff and I fell out. Stick around to the end to hear the terrible story. But don't worry, Mehreen fans, you will hear her coming on often and shouting at me.
There are definitely no Mehreen fans.
Well, if there are,
my
they will
mum
be
doesn't
shouting.
like me on this podcast.
That's rubbish, you're wrong. And I would hope that people in your age bracket, if any of them listen to our show, will also stick around and learn.
Yes, and so I'm trying to envisage in my head like the family tree of football with Cruyff at the top.
Yeah.
And then his biggest acolyte descendant is Pep. And now we live in a world where everyone who's touched by the greatness of Pep is basically dominating football.
Gets
so we're
the job,
basically
yeah.
going a couple of generations before, and we're going to find out about the OG, the godfather, Johan Cruyff. I also learned that he has a 94 rating on FIFA Legends, which for all the little kids out there, is a reason why you need to care.
Yeah. Okay, well, if they need a reason, that's it.
And the other one is the Cruyff turn, which just is the thing that I tried to do in the playground and fell on my arse, and is the trick of the day. Even in the world of stepovers, doing the Cruyff turn is like it's a piece of tech that you can show off with.
Those of us who grew up with Dutch football, explain to us, what is the Cruyff turn?
The Cruyff turn is when you're facing a defender or somebody's coming at you, and you do this body movement where you basically take the ball away from the defender in one movement, and you're basically free, right?
I think you back heel it behind your own legs and then chase the ball.
Yeah, you sort of, you shunt it behind yourself, then change your body movement, and you're basically clear. And it's the kind of thing that, I grew up trying to do in the playground. It is like the move that is sort of, I think in the 90s probably, and the early 2000s, before we get stepovers and all the crazy Rabonas and whatever players do, the Cruyff turn is like a sign of mastery as a young player, that all players sort of try and get one over on their mates in the playground.
I interviewed the Swedish defender he did it to, a guy called Jan Olsen. And Cruyff backheels the ball and runs away. And Olsen, I think, is kind of left lying on the floor. And Olsen said to me 30 years later, he said, no, I'm really proud that I was in that moment because everybody knows me for that. And as I was part of football
complete
history.
Humiliation.
But the thing is that in Holland, because people saw Cruyff for a decade in the Dutch league, and then he came back later. So my generation also saw him in the 80s. We saw so much of Cruyff, and it wasn't really a signature move of his, that move doesn't really have great significance in Holland. And I think this is where you get to the difference between the Cruyff seen by the world and the Cruyff seen by Dutch people or by Catalans, in that we knew the full Cruyff, and the world only knows the Cruyff of 1974. I mean, the crucial thing is that month in 74 is the only month that he's on global TV.
Right.
And so it's the only month that the world outside Holland and Catalonia sees him.
This team basically goes viral. Yeah,
they're just fantastic to watch. They're very violent, but they play beautiful football, top pace. By the way, a lot of this comes from my deep memories. It comes from two excellent books. David Winner's brilliant Orange. Remember David? He gave us a lift.
David. Yeah.
And Elke Kok's Dutch book, 1974. I think nobody has done 1974 as closely as Elke, so big up to him.
And before we get started on the story proper, let's do some sort of rudimentary stats. Johan Cruyff was born in 1947. He died of lung cancer in 2016. I remember there was an outpouring of emotion from the entire footballing community when that happened.
You'll have read my obituary in the Financial Times.
Paywall, but yes. He was named European Footballer of the Year in 1971, 72 and 73. 3 years in a row. Won 3 European Cups, something we now call the Champions League, with Ajax in 1971, 1972 and 1973. He also then went to Barcelona, won the league, became a groundbreaking coach for Barcelona, something we've touched on in our Pep episode.
And we'll do, a whole long series, obviously, on Cruyff, the coach.
And as you've already mentioned, bizarrely, he only played in one World Cup, the World Cup that is the subject of today's episode, because he was so chastened by the experience, he vowed and stuck to his promise to never feature in a World Cup ever again. So, Simon, you've spoken a lot about your affection for Johan Cruyff, but were you even around in 1974?
Well, I mean, I was 4 years old when they played the World Cup, and at the time I'd never heard of Holland. I probably hadn't heard of football. But 2 years later, 76, my dad got a job in a small Dutch town, Leiden. And the first night in our new house, my brother and I went outside, and the kids on the street were all outside, and they gathered around and they sang Crazy Boys, which I think was the only English they knew.
Is that a song?
It was a chant or a song. And then every night on the street, there was a street football match the kids on the street would play. So that was my introduction to Dutch football. And I fell in love with football, with Dutch football, and sort of studied at the feet of Johan Cruyff, later watching him in interviews, watching him play for Ajax as a 36-year-old. And his idea was football is a game that you play with your head. Every pass, everything you do on the field, you have to have thought about why you're doing it. It's a kind of intellectual game. So I learned to think about football the Dutch way. It's a game of technique, seeing the third man, as Cruyff called it, making triangles. It's geometry. And then when I later moved back to England at age 16, I discovered that English people think football is a kind of war, which was very bizarre, that you have to kind of be passionate and brave and break people's legs and,
Go in with your head.
Get stuck in, I didn't see the World Cup 74 as it happened, but the way Dutch football worked, you joined a club, and when the matches were rained off, and in Holland the matches were rained off almost every weekend, the kids would be assembled in the clubhouse and they'd play videos of the 1974 and 78 World Cups. So almost every Saturday in the rain, you were sitting in the clubhouse watching videos. It was kind of propaganda and indoctrination into Dutch football. So, Ruud Krol going down the left wing and crossing for Cruyff to volley home against Brazil, I can dream it. I saw it 30 times.
Simon, tell us about Cruyff's upbringing in Amsterdam.
Okay, so he's a total Amsterdammer. He's from Amsterdam East. His dad is a grocer. They live a few hundred yards from the Ajax stadium, the old Ajax stadium in East. From toddlerhood, he's walking over there to the stadium to hang out. His grandma knits him an Ajax kit when he's 2 years old. And Ajax, when he's growing up in the 50s, it's a little semi-professional club. It's not even the biggest club in Amsterdam. And Dutch football is rubbish. It's like Finnish football today. Cruyff, he goes to Ajax all the time. He doesn't even have to apply to become a member. When he's about 10, he gets a letter saying, you're a member. He plays baseball there. He's a star baseball player. He plays cricket. Happy childhood. And then when he's 12, his dad, aged 42, has a heart attack and died. And this is the big tragedy in Cruyff's life. And it will play into what becomes the disaster of the World Cup 74 final. His family is shattered, and this is a trauma he always remembers. His mother is left poor, and she has to clean the changing rooms at Ajax. So they really kind of live around the club. Age 17, 1964, he makes the first team. Initially, he's not allowed to, his mum won't let him play away games, he's only allowed to play at home. So he debuts in this rubbish club in Amsterdam East and nothing going on. And in 1965, Ajax appoint this new manager, this kind of bull-headed, very aggressive, grim-faced. He's a gym teacher for deaf children called Rinus Michels. I think, how would you say it's in English? Rinus Michels?
Yeah, probably, yeah. Rinus Michels. Makes it sound like a law firm.
Ajax are paying him to give 3 evening training sessions a week because, that's about the level of what the first team's up to.
Isn't it bad that they gave the deaf kids a really scary coach? Sorry, I was just thinking.
Yeah. Yes, it was probably quite cruel. At least they couldn't hear him. And Michels drives up to the little stadium in a second-hand Skoda. And he gives an interview where he says, we have to start at 0. But Michels is insane. And he has this plan. This club, Ajax Amsterdam, is going to be the best club in Europe. Just makes no sense at all. They're not even really trying to be the best team in Holland, which is a rubbish league at the time, let alone the best team in the world. Players have second jobs, they're driving instructors or gym teachers. And nobody's really that bothered about winning stuff. But then when Michels comes in, he says, okay, you guys are softies. You have a typical Dutch mentality, meaning that you don't really want to win, you don't want to suffer, and you have to kick the other team more. And we're going to play much quicker. So during pre-season training, they would play 2 friendlies a day.
Bloody hell.
Yeah.
Full
Michels
matches?
was rock hard. Yeah, I think they played 2 matches against amateur teams a day, which imagine if you're smoking and drinking as well, it's just really, really hard.
Does anyone's heart explode?
Actually, one player does, yeah. Nico Reinders was this young guy, comes into the team, and he has a heart attack, and he dies. Yeah. I mean, I don't know why or how, but...
And the new club doctor has some quite innovative ways of trying to get them through this stamina exercise.
So Michels is like, we're going to all run much more and do a lot of overlapping fullback stuff. And if you can't handle it, we have this doctor, Sean Rolink, who was a big user of amphetamines himself. And Rolink had a lot of pills. And I think they call them, you'll love this as a fan of Dutch cuisine, call them chocolate sprinkles.
Oh, my God.
So he'd give you a pill and he'd say, have your chocolate sprinkles. And the player would say, what's in it? And Rolink would say, you don't need to know that stuff.
Amazing.
So the player would swallow the pill and, it would kind of, you'd feel energized. There were no drugs tests in Dutch football in those days. So Michels comes in and he's rock hard. And Cruyff later says, Michels was the father and we his children whom he raised with a hard hand. So playing into this is all, Cruyff has lost his father. So Michels becomes the kind of replacement father. And, the players are part-timers. Cruyff is hauling bales of textiles in a warehouse. And Michels says, no, you're all going to be full-time. We're going to train all the time. And so they start training. And every training session, there's this teenage kid from the neighborhood who cycles over to watch. Just really interested in the training sessions. And he plays in the Ajax youth teams. He's this gangling guy with a high forehead, kind of pink face. Yeah, can you guess who he is? Louis van Gaal.
No way.
Yeah. Louis van Gaal, as a teenager, was watching the Cruyff Michels training sessions. He was a local boy, ended up in the second team, but couldn't get into the first team because the position he played was played by Johan Cruyff. So another lifelong trauma. So crazily, Michels gets it together. And there's all these Amsterdam kids popping up in the first team who, for no particular reason, are just really, really good at football. I think 65, they play Liverpool, the legendary Bill Shankly's Liverpool. And the mist is so thick that nobody can see the game. Even people on the field not quite sure what's happening. But Ajax win 5-0. And this is the moment when everybody says, what? It would be like Copenhagen beating Manchester City 5-0 today. It's just weird. And so there we see in the 60s, in this small stadium where often only 10,000 people show up to watch them, the team taking shape under Cruyff and Michels, who will become the World Cup 74 core team.
What's the dynamic like between the star player Cruyff and the manager Michels?
Well, Cruyff saw himself as the manager, so that was a problem as well. So Cruyff always knew better. Michels would begin to talk and Cruyff would say, yes, but, or on the field, Cruyff would suddenly rearrange all the players. He'd move people to different positions. And Michels would sit on the bench saying, what is he doing? And so the way I see it is it's a lot like the Lennon-McCartney relationship. Cruyff and Michels are Lennon and McCartney, because they inspire each other, but they also get on each other's nerves every single day. And Cruyff is disobedient, Cruyff smokes, Cruyff doesn't do enough running on the field, Cruyff is always talking back. So he drives Michels completely bonkers. But they kind of bounce off each other in an extremely productive way, and they're developing this new football.
And is it the case that Michels has the idea and then Cruyff becomes his visionary, or it's just a meeting of the minds and they both somehow think completely the same about how
I think they didn't know what they were going to do. They knew it had to be better. And so why are we rubbish and how are we going to be good? And they didn't have a game plan. And it's also after 1968, you get this kind of young people know best idea. So we're just going to do our thing on the field.
This is after the student revolutions, which changed the dynamics between younger generations and their
And Cruyff is a classic 1968 figure.
A rebel.
He's a rebel. Old people don't know best. I know best. And that's in part the spirit of the team. They have this dictatorial manager, but they all know best. And so every player is a playmaker. Every player is making decisions autonomously on the field. So English players always say, boss, what should I do, boss? And the Dutch players of the 60s are, I know what I'm going to do. So you get this very creative dynamic of 11 players making decisions, but Cruyff above all. And Cruyff is the orchestra leader. It's a cliche, but really he's an autonomous decision maker. So I was once, not to name drop, talking about Arsene Wenger about how he was inspired by Cruyff. And he said the problem is you couldn't replicate their football because that Dutch team relies on this player on the field making changes in real time, developing the tactics in real time. And Cruyff did that and nobody else does that. And they're developing this football that becomes what people start to call total football. They never called it total football. They didn't have a name for it. And it's we play in the other team's half. If we lose the ball, we press. Our fullbacks are on the halfway line, so that means our whole own half is undefended. Well, that means the goalkeeper has to play outside his box.
The sweeper keeper, yeah.
The sweeper keeper, the fly keeper from street football, because Cruyff's always playing street football. So a lot of what he knows about football, he knows from the street. So they developed this game, and it's working. And Arrigo Sacchi, the coach of the great Milan of the late 80s, would say, there has only been one real tactical revolution, and it happened when football shifted from an individual to a collective game. It happened with Ajax, meaning that you have these 11 players whose moves are totally coordinated. When the left back goes up, the winger drops back. When Cruyff leaves the centre-forward spot open, Johan Neeskens bursts into the box unmarked. It's a completely new way of thinking about a team. And in fact, it's expressed by Cruyff's shirt number. Even you know Cruyff's shirt number, right?
14.
Yeah, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, nobody was a 14.
Yeah.
14 expresses that he doesn't have a position. He is everywhere.
Yeah, it's a very odd number. Okay, so we have this small team in the Netherlands, in Ajax, which in the late 60s and 70s is developing a brand of football that's going to change the game as we know it. So how do we get to a stage where Cruyffian football and this very special Ajax team get introduced to the world, Simon?
They win these 3 straight European Cups. I mean, imagine a team now winning 3 straight Champions League. That's what they've done.
It's called Real Madrid.
They did win 3 straight with Zidane, you're right. Everybody sees it. Everybody has an opinion. Everyone who is interested in football is familiar with Madrid's football. In the early 70s, that just wasn't the case. It's sort of before football becomes a mass media sport. So 73, they're the best team in the world. Most people don't really know who they are, understand about them, but that's when they fall apart. Because Cruyff was always getting on everyone's nerves in the team. He was always telling people what to do. He loved arguing. He was always fighting with people. And everyone was getting a bit tired of the conflicts because there's all these baby boomers who are also Calvinists, and Calvinism is a religion which is very much about you read the Bible yourself and you arrive at your truth.
Yes.
Don't
There's
listen
no
to-
intermediaries
there's
between
no
you and God.
intermediary. Yeah, yeah.
It's democratic in that sense.
Yeah, these sort of very Protestant religions are very democratic. You don't listen to the priest.
And they're completely anti-authoritarian.
Yeah. So this is a very anti-authoritarian culture. Cruyff actually went to the school with the Bible, but I think did not absorb any of it and seems to have come from a totally religious background. But they had this kind of anti-authoritarianism built in, and he annoyed the hell out of everyone. So July 1973, before the next season, this team, 3 times champions of Europe, they're in a small hotel in the Eastern
Top of the
Netherlands.
world, right?
Top
You
of the
would
world.
think.
Everything's good.
Yeah.
And they do this very post-68 thing. They say, okay, we're going to elect the captain.
The players.
The players, yeah. So it's very kind of like a Maoist meeting. They sit down and Cruyff is the captain and he gets 7 votes. But his old friend and mentor, Piet Keizer, gets 8 votes. So Cruyff has been voted out of the captaincy and he can't handle it. And he walks out of the room and according to a story told by his teammate John Mulder, he walks to the phone on the wall. In those days, you had to call from sort of public phones. He picks it up, calls his father-in-law, his agent, and says, call Barcelona. He's done with Ajax.
Wow.
So that vote destroys Ajax. Cruyff goes to Barcelona. Michels is already there.
Democracy is very dangerous. I've always known this, to
Yeah,
be honest.
yeah. So-
I don't think Europeans are ready for democracy, to be honest.
No, certainly Dutch people
Now
aren't.
we've got
As
Geert
witness-
Wilders.
Yeah, witness the recent elections. Yeah, let Dutch people vote and things go wrong, I think is the moral of this. So he goes to Barcelona. The Ajax team falls apart. They never get close to winning a European Cup again. And he's very happy in Barcelona. They like the weather. They find people much friendlier and more cheerful than in Holland. Meanwhile, Holland qualifies for the World Cup, 74. Very surprising. Holland don't qualify for World Cups. And so the Dutch Football Association has to get its ass in gear and get a proper manager for a start. And the Dutch Football Association is the most incompetent organisation in the world. They have 2 national team managers because they didn't want to sack the one, so they just brought in the other without kind of sacking the first. So one of them is this Czech refugee called František Fadronk, who doesn't really speak Dutch, but tries to. So the players don't know what he's saying, but they like him. He's a nice man. And the other is this Dutch ex-footballer called Cor van der Hart, whose problem is that he's an alcoholic. Van der Hart and Fadronk obviously don't like each other. So the Dutch say, okay, we're going to solve the problem by appointing a 3rd manager, but this will be the boss manager. It'd be Michels. Because if we appoint Michels, he's obviously the boss. I mean, he's not, going to listen to anyone else. But he has to be in Barcelona for the World Cup.
Because he's still the manager of Barcelona.
He's still the manager of Barcelona.
And the 3rd manager of the Netherlands.
So Michels has to fly back and forth between Spain to coach his team in the Spanish Cup and Germany, where his team is playing in the World Cup. So he's got 2 jobs. This is also important because it means that if Michels isn't there, who is going to make all the decisions and run the team?
Johan Cruyff.
Cruyff. So
It was set
Cruyff,
up for him.
more than at any time, is the manager of Holland. Even Cruyff doesn't believe Holland are going to do anything because he books a holiday for his family that will start 10 days before the end of the World Cup because he presumes they're going to be knocked out. The brilliant Ajax midfielder Gerry Muren has said, sorry lads, I can't come to the World Cup because I'm going on a family
So
holiday.
this cabinet minister just took a holiday in the election campaign and didn't cancel it.
Dutch people like holidays. They don't usually
Sacred.
like working really hard, yeah.
Okay, so it's the summer of 1974, and we have some very unpromising beginnings, a completely incompetent football authority, a manager of the Dutch national team who's still managing his domestic side. He's got 2 jobs, Michels, as we're going to call him. Players and fans who really don't expect anything of this country because, as you said, this is not a footballing nation that's ever produced anything of note. And then somehow, in the summer of 1974, as we get through the tournament, this, Simon, will become the greatest team to have never won the World Cup.
Join us after the break to hear about the totally unfair tragedy that ends up being visited on this Dutch team.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
This is a reminder that you're listening to Heroes and Humans of Football with me, Mehreen Khan.
And me, Simon Cooper.
Welcome back to Heroes and Humans. You join us as we are about to tell the story of the 1974 World Cup, Simon, which is held in West Germany. And with my kind of Britishness, I'm thinking, West Germany, 30 years after the end of the war, hosting a major tournament where lots of the European countries that fought a war against this country are now going to be playing in a World Cup. I imagine this is quite a major political moment, and there's extra tensions around between West Germany and its former European opposition.
Funnily enough, almost nobody in Holland talks about that. I think the pain of the war is too fresh in those days. People haven't yet learned how to talk about it. Dutch people in that era also knew that their own country's wartime behaviour had been dubious, very collaborationist, so people don't want to dredge that up all again. I mean, I spoke to Johnny Rep, who was the great centre forward of that team, about this, and he said, look, the players didn't talk about the war. Cruyff spoke tens of millions of words in his life, and I've never heard him mention the war. It was alive for some players. So there was Ruud Krol, whose father had been a resistance hero, but unrecognised until very late in his life. He had 12 Jews living above his shop. He was just broken by the experience, the terror. He never got over it. There was Michels himself, who as a young man in the hunger winter of 44, 45, I think he'd lain in bed for months with nothing to eat. So it took him a year before he was strong enough to...
This is the years of starvation.
It was a winter of starvation, the Hongerwinter it's called in Holland, where the Germans stopped sending food to Holland. I think the guy for whom the war was just central to this whole experience, the one Dutch player, was Willem van Hanegem, great Dutch midfielder. Brutal, violent, hard as nails, fantastic playmaker. And in 1944, when he was a baby, an Allied bomb on their village, an accidental Allied bomb, I think, had killed his father and siblings. And so he grew up alone with his mother. Van Hanegem always hated Germans. He went into that final hating the Germans and was crushed that they then lost to the Germans. But most of it's not something that's talked about. People don't know yet how to talk about it. And these are the decades after the war. You know, the post-war economic growth is about to halt, but it's been a very good economic time. People
these guys are the boomers, right?
Yeah, it's the boomers.
The gilded generation of post-war Europe.
Yeah, people are looking ahead, not backward. Yeah.
So we're kind of committing a bit of a historical fallacy to say that this is a really charged World War II-ish.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't really have a strong relationship with Germany either way, because later Holland and Germany become football rivals. But in 1974, how could you be the football rival of a country
the great Germany,
West
Germany.
They've won the World Cup, Holland or nothing. It would be like Luxembourg trying to be the rival of Germany. So in Holland, the big game was Holland-Belgium in those days, Holland-Belgium. We beat the Belgians.
Yeah.
That would
be...
be...
Benelux derby.
Yeah, the Benelux derby. Yeah.
And also the Dutch team don't have to go very far to set up their World Cup camp.
I mean, they can practically cycle. They stay in a hotel in Hiltrup near Münster, which is just over the Dutch border. They've never played in a tournament before. They think, brilliant, this is a nice hotel. A bit boring, but so we're going to fill the time drinking, smoking, playing tennis, messing around in the pool, and going into Münster late at night to meet women.
Messing around in the pool is something that's going to come back to bite them in the bum.
Yes, almost literally. Michels is a disciplinarian, but he kind of takes a blind eye approach. He's in Barcelona a lot of the World Cup anyway, and he thinks, I just don't want to see what they're doing because then I'd have to fight with them, and this is not a battle I'm going to win. So he just kind of lets it happen.
So just before the World Cup starts, Cruyff and the sort of semi-absent manager Michels actually start remaking and rethinking how players are going to play on the pitch and the positions that they're going to occupy.
And it's much more Cruyff than Michels because Michels is in Barcelona. And Cruyff, remember, he's 27. He's at his absolute peak. He's totally experienced. He's been European Footballer of the Year 3 times.
He's captain?
He couldn't not be captain.
Yeah.
So he's like, I got this. This is my team. And Michels, I think, feels a little bit, I'm going to leave it to him.
But Cruyff also ends up making some strange decisions.
Strange decisions, but brilliant decisions. They've made these two very strange choices. It's a national team that just doesn't make sense. One is that the goalkeeper, Jan Jongbloed, he plays for a small team called FC Amsterdam, and he's a cigar shop owner. He's a semi-pro. And he'd played one game for Holland in the early 60s. I think he only played a half. Cruyff said, yeah, he's going to be the keeper at the World Cup. People said, why? And the thing was, Jongbloed could play football. He was quite a good footballer. He wasn't a great keeper, but he was a good footballer. So that's what you wanted. It had to be a fly keeper.
Pass from the back.
Pass from the back. Yeah. In Cruyff's phrase, the keeper is the first attacker. And the other thing is Holland had this brilliant goalkeeper, Jan van Beveren, played for PSV Eindhoven. But he and Cruyff didn't get on. Van Beveren was this beautiful, saver of shots in the top corner. He played from the line. He didn't really believe in coming out of his box. So he was the wrong kind of keeper and he didn't get on with Cruyff. So one of the tragedies of Dutch football is that Jongbloed, who couldn't really keep goal, played 2 World Cup finals, and Van Beveren never played in a World Cup. So Jongbloed's in goal, chosen by Cruyff. And then there's this midfielder at Ajax, Arie Haan. And Cruyff said to him before the World Cup, you're going to play sweeper. And Hans said, are you crazy? Because Hans like, I'm a midfielder. You want me to play sweeper at a World Cup?
So this is the defender that is behind the
for young
defenders.
people. Yeah. So the defender in Cruyffian football, he starts behind, but when you have the ball, he goes into midfield, like Pep's teams do now as well. When you don't have the ball, you have 4 at the back. But when you have the ball, you have 4 in midfield, means you always dominate midfield. So Han would come into midfield and Holland would win midfield. And so you got these 2 players playing in roles that Cruyff has sort of invented for them. It's just a really fascinating team. It's a very innovative thing. And then the tournament starts. It's Holland-Uruguay. If you look at them lined up for this first game, with their long hair, to me they look like a 70s rock band. Cruyff is dressed by his wife, Denny. So Cruyff, before he meets Denny in the early 60s, I think, he looks like a total nerd. He looks like he's from, 1932. And Denny says, no, you're going to grow your hair long and we're going to buy you proper flower shirts and that kind of stuff. And she moves him from the 1930s straight to 1974. And the Dutch team was sponsored by Adidas, the 3 stripes. But if you look at Cruyff's shirt, his sleeves, there are only 2 stripes. Because Cruyff is sponsored by Puma and he refuses to wear Adidas, so he tears a stripe off his shirt, which is very Cruyff, always difficult, always after more money. But you, as our resident fashion editor, what do you make of their look?
So the shirt thing, I think, is amazing. Obviously, you know that I am a big fan of all forms of shithousery, particularly when it involves commercial sponsors. I mean, looking back now, where sponsors are basically run football, right? Messi cannot not wear Nike shirts because he's an Adidas athlete.
It would never
happen. And the fact that even Adidas, have to sort of succumb to Cruyff's wishes shows the power of the superstar. And it's iconic. And he talks about, I'm the only person in the world with the 2 stripes, because his love for Puma is that deep. I think the Dutch football shirt, is the best football shirt of all time. I love it.
74.
So 88 is seen to be the greatest.
No, 88 was terrible, those tiger stripes, but 74.
No, everyone loves 88. It's been named the greatest football shirt of all time.
Yeah, it's just wrong. It was a lovely team, but the 74 shirt is a brighter orange.
And the huge
and the big lion
logo.
on the chest.
Yeah.
And I think orange, because you didn't have Ivory Coast in World Cups then. So everyone is playing in red or in white or blue. And then this team comes along in orange, and it's a happy colour and it's a unique colour. So, there'd never been a Dutch orange army going abroad until 74. And people start buying orange shirts, even Germans buy orange shirts. And so you get this Dutch army thing. And so they look up at the stands before this first game against Uruguay, and the players are like, what? There's people in orange shirts.
Who
are these people?
Who are these people? Our fans.
We have fans. They didn't even have fans with Ajax, let alone with the national team.
Right.
And suddenly, the stands are full of people in orange.
This is is it William Orange, right? This is where the orange comes from.
So the Dutch royal family originally comes from Orange in France.
Got it.
And so I think that's the origin of the name.
So I love the look. It's my favourite football shirt of all time, all of them, even though the modern ones are kind of now harking back to the older ones. I love the haircut. It kind of looks like a mod, that whole Liam Noel Gallagher thing that came back in the 90s. I think it's a very, very strong look. So it gets 10 out of 10 from me.
Great. And then they play against Uruguay, and the Dutch play this pressing game that to us now looks normal, but it's hyper-aggressive pressing. So when they storm out for offside, they'll... the Uruguayans are playing this kind of very slow... Genteel. I have the ball, I look around on the ball, I think about life, I wonder about my mother. Like when the Uruguayans go forward, the Dutch spring their offside trap, and they'll catch 5 Uruguayans offside.
Ambush.
But my favourite moment, you can see it on YouTube, is this Uruguayan defender has the ball at the back, and he thinks, I am a sweeper, I have the ball, I take my time. And he's stormed by 4 Dutch guys. He ends up lying on the floor, the Dutch run off with the ball, and it's like watching the dodo go extinct in real time, because this guy is playing the football of the 1950s and they're playing the football of the 2000s.
Of the future. Yeah,
they're playing the football of the future. And that's the weird thing, when you watch it now, when you watch old football, you think this is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's super slow.
And
plodding.
Yeah, I watched the 1981 game with my kids during the pandemic. It was on French TV, Holland, France. And I have to admit, my children were laughing. They said, these people, they can't play football.
Well, the pitches are bad and the balls are heavy. And, it's...
But that's the weird thing about Holland in 74. When you watch a lot of it, you think, oh, wow, that's good football, and it's fast as well. So it's like time travel. And Cruyff, he says, almost all the teams he played against, they just seemed clueless. He said they were doing things we'd stopped doing 5 or 6 years ago. It's the football of the future. And they hammer everyone. They hammer Argentina. They beat Brazil. And Cruyff was a great passer. I remember when I was watching Dutch TV in the early 80s, he hit a pass that was so surprising that the TV camera, there'd only been one camera at the game off and couldn't catch up. So Cruyff would be hitting a pass to the outside of his right foot. And then you'd lose things, and then later you'd hear that somebody had scored in the penalty area because he saw passes nobody could see because he was four-footed. So he had this great biographer, Nico Scheepmaker, and he said some players are two-footed, Cruyff is four-footed because he uses the outsides of his right foot and his left foot. So we all began to do that. Everybody watching Dutch football began to think, right, if the ball is right underneath you, you can hit a curler with the outside of your right foot. So he kind of expands the palette in ways that nobody had thought of at that time. So the fans in the stands are going nuts, and they got this new song, Holland wint de Wereldcup.
I wonder what that means.
And they also have this colonialist song, which I grew up with in the late 70s, about Wij hebben gewonnen de zilvervloot, which means we have won the fleet of silver, which is about the kind of pirate captain Piet Hein capturing the Spanish silver in 1628. So it's all very colonialist tinted, and, you know.
Yeah, it always comes back. It always comes out in the football, doesn't it?
But everyone's having a brilliant time, and people of my generation love to sing Wij hebben gewonnen de zilvervloot, we have won the fleet of silver.
Yeah, did you also used to black up for Christmas, yeah?
I was present where there were black Pete's.
Black Pete's?
Blacked up, and I didn't realise that it was bad, yeah.
Wow. Life comes at you fast.
So they're brilliant, and they beat Brazil, the reigning world champions. Yeah, they're just great, and the West Germans, who've also reached the final, not so great. So Holland are just definitely the team of the World Cup.
And I guess they've won over the neutrals, right?
Yeah, everyone supports them. Even Germans are buying orange shirts.
Right.
So it's all beautiful. But then, in the lead up to the final, the last few days, things go wrong. They have this big party in the Dutch camp with this Dutch pop group called the Cats. It's great. The Dutch camp it's a bit like being on tour with a rock band of the 70s. It's not like being in a football team of the 2020s. So there's a lot of people hanging around. Some German journalists have booked themselves into the staff quarters of the hotel, and they become friendly with the players. And some local women also come in, are very welcome. So there's this big party that night. Elke Kok describes it that well. The party has these two quite major consequences. One is that the assistant coach, Cor van der Hart, the alcoholic, he kind of goes too far. He's throwing champagne bottles. I think one of them almost nuts Johan Neeskens, the great Dutch midfielder. And he's misbehaving in public, and he has to go. The problem is that Van der Hart is their scout. And Van der Hart had watched Germany, who are their opponents in the final, once early in the tournament. But since then, West Germany changed the whole team. So the Dutch don't really know the West German team they're going to be playing against, and they've sent home their scout now. The other bigger thing that happens that night of the party is that one of the German reporters is around, is going undercover. They're all these young men, young women. He gets invited along to this late night skinny dip in the pool where everybody takes off their clothes, including by the German reporter's account, which I believe, including Cruyff and some other Dutch players and some groupies. Some ladies. They all jump in the pool. It's beautiful. A summer night in Germany. And this reporter, he feels a bit conflicted because, he likes the players, they're his mates.
And he's been given privileged access.
Yeah. And he said that he's a salesman.
Oh.
Yeah. And then built the German tabloid. You as a connoisseur of tabloids, maybe you should explain briefly.
Well, we should probably explain to, I guess, more Anglophone listeners that Bild Zeitung is sort of like the Sun, the News of the World, and the New York Post sort of all rolled into one. It invented tabloid journalism before even Rupert Murdoch did. And so they're still known for this today, basically character assassinations, a fascination with celebrity culture. But they were doing this far, far before anyone, I think, in the English-speaking world was. So Bild, it occupies a very special place, I think, in the global media landscape.
And Bild are going to publish this story about the skinny dip with the headline, Cruyff, Champagne and Naked Girls.
Wow.
Cruyff, Sekt und nackte Mädchen. So Cruyff gets wind of this, and he goes to the so-called salesman who's already a reporter and says, you've got to stop this story. And the guy says, I can't. It's being printed. The Bild run this story with a photograph, disappointingly, of an empty swimming pool. There's nobody in the pool.
Nobody had an iPhone back then.
Yeah, imagine with an iPhone. I don't think the Germans particularly noticed this story. It's, as you say, it's just another Bild thing. But the Dutch go crazy and they think this is a German influence campaign. And in Holland,
A hit job, basically.
it's a hit job deliberately orchestrated by the German nation.
Pesky
And
Germans.
so then feelings about war do start coming up
Uh-huh.
against our brave little team.
Yes.
And I think the first Dutch tabloid magazine is founded in 1974.
Right.
So they just don't have any experience of this kind of thing. It just didn't happen.
And privacy is still a thing.
Yeah, I mean, they just took it for granted, obviously,
Footballers' party, yeah. So
footballers'
what?
party, and why would anybody write about it? Who cares? It's a disaster for Cruyff. Because Elke Kok, he also wrote a very good Cruyff biography in which he reports, among other things, that Cruyff was a discreet adulterer. He would have these little affairs, but he was also at the same time a devoted family man. Unlike most footballers, he was married all his life to the same woman and very devoted to his wife, children, grandchildren. Because he'd lost his own family when his father died, his whole life was devoted to his family, despite his adulteries. And so for him, this story on the front page of a big newspaper is the worst thing that could possibly happen. And his wife, she's devastated. So she's in Barcelona. He has to call her all the time. So there's a phone booth in the hotel, and it's very public. It's, one of these old glass phone booths. Cruyff is in the phone booth the whole time, calling home. She's shouting at him. Maybe she's threatening divorce. And already he was unhappy at the idea of being away from his family for 3 weeks. He really dreaded that. And now this worst of all things has happened. His wife, I don't know what she says, but he seems to worry about his marriage. And so he spends the days before the final kind of white as a sheet, hours and hours in this phone booth, making calls at enormous expense.
So this is a shock to his system. So
It's the worst thing that could have happened, yeah. It's just devastating. And he decides then, okay, one World Cup, I'm never going to do this again. I'm not going to go to the World Cup in 78 in Argentina. It's too far away. This is my only World Cup. And so that build story will arguably end up costing Holland not one World Cup trophy, but two.
because Cruyff will not go to the World Cup in 78 in Argentina, where Holland make the final.
Get to extra time in the final without Cruyff.
And if they had him, surely the rest would have
Obviously.
been history.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a remarkably modern tale if we're talking about the mid-70s, now in the world of, well, I guess maybe less rampant tabloid journalism, but social media where footballers, their characters, their personalities, everything is on show and can bring them down, especially ahead of games.
And so Cruyff is in the worst possible state before the final. And he's just done. His thoughts are at home. And the Netherlands are a bit cocky because they've played this brilliant World Cup. The Germans haven't been great. And the players have this experience. Well, in club football, we always beat the Germans anyway. Germans are not good at football, I think. There'd been this pre-season friendly in 1972, Ajax-Bayern, where Ajax won 5-0. And the Dutch team take this as a kind of model. Well, this is how we're going to play the final, like in that pre-season friendly 2 years ago. And they don't really know anyway how the Germans are playing because the Germans have rearranged their team since the start of the World Cup. The other thing that goes wrong is that before every game, Willem van Hanegem, the midfielder, would play a cassette tape in the bus with this medley from David Bowie's Sorrow, and it peaks at kind of climaxes with Joe Cocker's Blue Medley. And this, gets the players into the mood. It's tradition now, but on the day of the final, Van Hanegem can't find the tape.
Oh, no.
Bad omen. So they go to the final. Munich, hometown of German captain Franz Beckenbauer. But the referee, for English listeners, is a butcher from Wolverhampton, Jack Taylor. Taylor doesn't do so well in the first minute because Holland passed the ball around and is very kind of cocky and arrogant. And it's not sort of the way they normally play at top pace. It's very slow. And then Cruyff goes back into midfield, as he does. He says to one of the defenders, give me the ball. And so he takes the ball, he kind of pushes the other man away, takes the ball, and he does this 40-metre acceleration. And Cruyff had a double acceleration. So you think he's sprinting, and then he sprints. He goes into a fifth gear. He gets near the box, and he's brought down by a German. Jack Taylor points to the spot, but he's wrong because the foul is just outside the box. But Cruyff is going at such pace that he crashes into the box. So in the very first minute of the World Cup final, Holland are given a penalty, and no German has yet touched the ball. So the Dutch have this penalty taker, Johan Cruyff, who just blasts. Cruyff slightly scuffs it, but it goes in. This is kind of the best moment in Dutch football history. First minute of the World Cup final, 1-0, we're going to win. And I watched this penalty 100 times whenever it rained, and it usually rained, and the football was rained off in clubhouses in the late 70s, early 80s. And so did everybody in Holland who played football. So one friend of mine says that he remembers his kids' team watching, and the Cruyff's penalty goes in, and they all jump up cheering. even though they know exactly what's going to happen next.
Yes.
So the first German to touch the ball, nearly 2 minutes gone, is keeper Sepp Maier picking it out of the net. But after that, in the words of Cruyff's now estranged brother Henny, Cruyff played like a dish rag. He just hangs around in midfield. He's done. I mean, they've also been smoking and drinking for 3 weeks. So.
At some point, yeah, he's going to catch up.
Yeah. So Paul Breitner gets a penalty. Gerd Müller scores the winner. The goal rolls past the motionless Jan Jongbloed, who kind of looks at it like it's a cigar passing in his shop. And this is where Jan van Beveren would have won Holland the World Cup. And the Germans win 2-1. So Cruyff just thinks, thank God it's all over. You know, we lost the final, but whatever.
So he's a broken man. His marriage might be broken.
He's worried about his marriage, yeah. And he thinks, I'm not going to do this for the World Cup. I mean, there's this World Cup 78. There's this silly myth that he boycotted the World Cup 78 in protest against the Argentinian military regime.
Right, that's not true.
No, I mean, people would look at Cruyff and think, yeah, long hair, anti-authoritarian, he must be a lefty. But his only political belief was that rich people should pay low taxes. That was the only thing he cared about in politics. So he just...
But he makes his very impulsive decision, but he does stick to it. Nobody can convince him to come back.
Yeah, it's the thing he's just most sure about. So Holland have lost. And, you know, I always hear from foreigners, oh, it's a tragedy, your country has lost 3 World Cup finals. But I don't think it is a tragedy at all. You've got this little country, no football tradition, and they finished second in the world. And then they're second again in 1978, 2010. It's brilliant. So the team come home and the fans are celebrating. And Cruyff wrote this newspaper column the morning of the final, before the match. And the headline is, goal achieved. Not goal nearly achieved. Goal achieved. We've got to the final. It's all good.
I cannot think of a footballing culture that's more dissimilar to the English one.
Yeah.
Where winning is the only thing that matters.
The Dutch fly home and there's huge crowds singing Holland wint de Wereldcup. And they have a brilliant evening at the palace. They dance the conga with the Prime Minister, Joop den Uyl. Everyone's happy. We finished second. It's great. So I don't think trauma. I mean, it's a tragedy for Willem van Hanegem, who couldn't bear losing the World Cup final to Germans. But everyone else is fine about it.
But so we often at the end of the show sort of think about legacy. And my feeling is that even though you're sort of very placid about this, has there not been a sense now the decades have passed and Dutch football, especially in the last decade or so, got considerably worse, that you look back on that golden age and think that was when we definitely should have won it, because now we're really not going to win it?
The Dutch narrative is that we really did win the World Cup in 74. And that became Cruyff's narrative. Now, Cruyff was a total winner who used to cheat at dominoes and Monopoly to beat his kids. In 74, he realises, hang on, people think we play beautiful football. They really like our football. And nobody who didn't live in Holland had ever really noticed their football. And now the world is saying, we love your football, it's great. And he says, really, we're the moral winners. He creates this kind of category in Dutch, which becomes essential in Dutch football, of moral winners. We play the most beautiful football, and that's what it's really about. And so, okay, the Germans won the match, but who cares about that? And he said, imagine that defeat made us more famous than a victory could have. So I think there's countries that need to win a World Cup, like Brazil, like Argentina, which also have these kind of, this existential pain, which comes from things outside football, that they need to be best in the world at something. And the Dutch have historically felt, well, we have the best society in the world anyway, and we're rich. We're more modern.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
we did gay marriage first. We legalized marijuana. We're just more
Liberal.
Well, they don't use that word anymore. More modern.
Yeah.
Than anyone else.
Yeah.
Best quality of life, and we don't have to work, and we're still rich. And yeah, so Holland doesn't need to win the World Cup. Small countries don't need to win the World Cup. When Holland goes to the World Cup, that would be ludicrous for a country of now 18 million people to have that as the goal.
Yeah. They're also a country which definitely knows its place in the world as a small country.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's this maxim that there's only 2 types of countries in the world, small countries and countries that don't realise that they're small countries. The Dutch definitely know they're small countries, which is why they'll never leave the EU despite threatening all the time, because they know that they're just a small country.
Yeah, and there's this Dutch saying, what a small country can be big at, waar een klein land niet groot in kan zijn. So,
I mean, in the Dutch case is exporting tomatoes.
Yeah, they've been growing them in greenhouses since the 19th century.
Yeah.
They do other things really well. I'm trying to think.
Tax evasion?
Yeah, helping Google evade taxes, yeah. So in the long run, I would argue Holland won, Cruyff won, everyone remembers that team, and Cruyff birthed the football of his footballing son.
I'll give that
Pep
to you.
And Jurgen Klopp. And it's a football I grew up on, every kid in Holland grew up on. And I think just as importantly to Cruyff, his family stayed together. when he dies in 2016, his wife, Danny, and the kids are around him. And I think in 1974, he'd have signed up for that outcome.
And then the apotheosis of your life,
Yeah.
you met the great man many years later when you're a journalist, a football journalist, and you get the chance to sit down and meet your hero. What happened, Simon?
Yeah, so it's Euro 2000 is coming up. So the Observer I'm writing for asked me, who is the most interesting man in Dutch football?
Duh.
So they do a deal with Cruyff. Cruyff is going to speak to me on the phone every week during the Euro.
Wow.
And I'm going to ghost a column for him in the Observer. Before that, we're going to introduce him to our readers. Simon's going to go to Barcelona and interview Cruyff as a kind of prelude spread. And the Observer think, deal's done, we're going to pay money to his foundation, all agreed. So I interview Cruyff in his mansion. It's extremely exciting. I won't go through the whole prelude about how he calls me on my mobile phone, which is already the biggest moments in my life, and directs me to his house. And I arrive and he's quite cordial. He's a bit disappointed he can't watch the Champions League that night because he has to talk to me, but he loves to talk. So we have a very nice time together. During the interview, he teaches me how to shoot with your left foot. Essentially, you lose balance when you shoot with your wrong foot, so you have to throw out your right arm, and then it's all fine. And he demonstrates this, and since then, after that, I was much better with my left. And it's all good. I mean, he's not as brilliant as he was when he was younger. He's already getting a bit kind of old and dull. He's 53, about the age I am now. So I write about this in the Observer, and then the Cruyff Foundation say, well, the Observer, you misunderstood. We didn't really do a deal with you. You have to pay us much more money than you thought. So the Observer say this is just a nightmare doing business with Cruyff, which is everyone's experience, to be fair. So they pull out. Months later, I write a piece in this Dutch literary football magazine. I'm paid about 150 quid.
There are literary football magazines.
It's very successful. Hartgras, big shout out. Still going. 30 years. I write this piece about what it was like to meet my hero and everybody's hero. As I say, I think I got paid about £150. Cruyff sees it and he does his nut. He should pay me again, he thinks. And he gives these interviews to his kind of pet lapdogs in the Dutch media saying Simon Cooper is a criminal and a plagiarist and he's conned me. And it's just brutal.
Oh my God. He character assassinates you.
He character assassinates me.
Wow.
I mean, if any listeners had a worse experience with their childhood hero, please don't tell us because I don't think I could bear it. I go away thinking, right, I kind of understand him better now.
Yeah.
This is the other side of Cruyff. So I was telling the story to Johnny Rep about what had happened to me, and Rep was like, yeah, that's,
His former teammate.
His former teammate. He says, yeah, Johan he's really hard, and he does those things. And then Rep, who was then in his 50s, he panics. And he says, don't write that I said this. He says, because Johan can break you. Johan can destroy you. And I'm telling the story 25 years later because I think Shawnee is safe now. But his point was Cruyff was just a massive hard ass.
He's a maniac.
He was a maniac. He was brilliant. He was impossible. The experience I had is quite typical of the experiences that lots of people had dealing with Cruyff.
So we often ask, to end our episodes, would you meet our protagonist? I guess with you. I mean, did you ever get a chance to reconcile before he died? Did you ever see him again?
We did not reconcile before he died. I don't think any of his other enemies reconciled with him before he died again.
Yeah.
I don't think I could handle another evening with him.
I'd mediate.
You would mediate?
Just like lessen the tension. We could play FIFA, watch the game.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe I'd send you.
Instead?
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean...
Well, he's dead now, so we'd have to contact him through a Ouija board.
Yeah. Well, we'll see him in heaven.
Thank you for listening to Heroes and Humans of Football. For more information, go to our website at heroesandhumans.com.
And follow us at Heroes and Humans on all social platforms. This show was developed by Immaterial and produced by One Fine Play. Matt Cheney is the series producer. Kazra Firuzia is the editor and producer. We have been your hosts, Mehreen Khan
and Simon Cooper.
And this has been Heroes and Humans of Football.